leaving lengthy queues on the approach. Now, on the M1 heading towards London, the slip road is partly blocked at junction 5. The A41 exit for Watford, of course, a lorry's broken down. That's causing long queues nearly back to the M25. The M27 in Hampshire's down to 2 lanes eastbound. The 2 outside lanes blocked off at junction 5, the Southampton Airport turn-off at the scene of a crash. Queues back along the M271 towards the Redbridge flyover towards Southampton. I can see on the cameras. Now in Dorset, finally, to the northeast of Lyme Regis, the A35 closed through Charmouth at the scene of an accident. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
There's still...
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850... Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday,
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Today, the beauty pageant. Yes, the 4 hopefuls for the Tory leadership had their presentations to the annual Conservative Party conference. Tonight we debate who is going to win. Did anybody go up or down today? And Sir Keir Starmer goes to Brussels. Yes, he does. It's all part of his EU reset. What did we learn from the speech he gave after the meeting? And a surge in migrant HIV cases in our country. This is people with HIV that have been born abroad. I've got to ask the question, is this really what the National Health Service is for? But before all of that, let's get the news with Cameron Walker.
Good evening. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister confirms there will be no return to freedom of movement in any reset of relations between the UK and the European Union. Sir Keir Starmer's been speaking at a press conference in Brussels where he is meeting European Union chiefs with a promise to put the Brexit years behind us and form a closer relationship with the bloc. It's his first visit to Brussels as Prime Minister.
Now, of course, there will be issues which are difficult to resolve and on areas on which we will stand firm. There will be no return to freedom of movement, no return to the customs union, no return to the single market. But we will find constructive ways to work together and deliver for the British people.
Well, it's emerged Sir Keir's paying back more than £6,000 worth of gifts and hospitality received since he became Prime Minister. Downing Street's confirmed he's covering the costs of 6 Taylor Swift tickets, 4 to the races, and a clothing rental agreement with a high-end designer favoured by his wife, Lady Victoria Starmer. It comes after Sir Keir and other cabinet members who vowed to clean up British politics faced weeks of criticism for accepting tens of thousands of pounds worth of freebies from wealthy donors. President Biden says he does not support strikes on Iran's nuclear sites in response to its missile attack against Israel. Iran launched over 180 ballistic missiles at Israel last night, which the United States president previously called ineffective. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed that Iran will face consequences, with some analysts suggesting Israel's response could be more forceful this time, potentially targeting Iran's nuclear or oil facilities. Joe Biden has hinted at additional sanctions against Iran. The Conservative leadership candidates have reflected on their general election defeat in their final speeches at the party's conference in Birmingham. Tom Tugendhat, James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch are all appealing to members in their bids to replace Rishi Sunak. And finally, the Prince and Princess of Wales have met an aspiring teenage photographer with a rare and aggressive form of cancer after inviting her to take pictures at William's Windsor Castle investiture. The princess, who has recently completed her own chemotherapy treatment and is a keen amateur photographer herself, was pictured hugging 16-year-old Liz from Harrogate. In a personal message on social media, William and Catherine said, "A pleasure to meet with Liz at Windsor today, a talented young photographer whose creativity and strength has inspired us both. Thank you for sharing your photos and story with us." Well, those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Cameron Walker. Now it's back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Now, I know that 2/3 of the country couldn't give a damn who becomes the next Conservative leader. In fact, polling suggests 1/3 of those that even voted Conservative don't really care that much. But hey, it's happening and it's important. So, who is going to win this contest? And did we learn any clues today? Who's up? Who's down? Let's see a short clip from each of the 4 contestants in today's beauty pageant.
And never forget, Reform didn't deliver Brexit, we did. Reform didn't cut immigration, I did. And mark my words, we will beat Reform by being the best version of ourselves.
I will tell you what a Conservative is. Someone who believes in Britain, who believes in limited government, who believes in free trade and responsibility to others. Now, we are not afraid of the future.
I am for the country of Magna Carta, of the habeas corpus, of the Bill of Rights, defending our own freedoms and liberties. I am for finishing the job that we started with Brexit and restoring to our people and our Parliament its sovereignty.
The Conservatives have to be the party of wealth creation. Wealth is not a dirty word. It supports jobs and families. It pays for our schools and our health service. We should defend it and encourage it.
Well, I watched all of that very, very carefully live. My view was, Tom's Hugenhart, perfectly nice chap, a little bit like someone teaching A-level geography or physics or perhaps something like that, not exactly bursting with charisma. James Cleverly, I thought the content of what he said was absolute nonsense from my perspective, but I thought he delivered it really very, very well. Here was somebody assured and experienced, didn't look nervous. I think, frankly, a very good performance from Cleverly. Now, when it comes to Jenrick, the great Brexiteer, who voted Remain, basically, he's trying to be Nigel Farage. Now, look, if you want, Robert, lessons in being Nigel Farage, I'm very happy to coach you. So, of course, in terms of policy, I agreed with a lot of what he said myself, but I frankly thought he was a bit of a charisma-free zone. And then Kemi Badenoch, well, very heavily scripted. Staring at that order queue at the back of the hall, but telling the audience a lot of what they wanted to hear. But there was one standout moment, one moment that made me laugh out loud that I think was delivered brilliantly, and it came from James Cleverly.
And one day, I got the call. I got mobilised. I thought I was going to Basra or Baghdad, and I was sent to Luton.
That still makes me laugh. And it was good and it was clever because actually self-deprecation in this country still works very, very well. So my view is whatever the starting positions were, I had little doubt that it was Cleverly that made advances today. And I felt Jenrick actually was going backwards. That is my take on it. But tell me, at home, who do you think is going to win? Farage at GBNews.com. Sir Jake Berry is a former Member of Parliament and former chairman of the Conservative Party, and Lloyd Russell-Moyle, former Labour Member of Parliament. Jake, what did you make of today?
Well, it's been a very interesting conference. I'm not sure how important it was, because actually the only people who are going to have a vote on whittling these 4 Tory titans down to 2 are the MPs.
And frankly, titans?
Frankly, Nigel, I didn't see many colleagues at conference. I was there. I went for a day and a half, a couple of days.
Yeah.
There weren't that many there. Look, at the conference, Tom Tugendhat, undoubtedly, in my view, someone I'm supporting, had the best conference. There was a buzz about him. The members event he did was packed. Look, I don't think he was the best performer today, but I don't think that particularly matters. James Cleverly was great.
To be honest,
what I would say is this.
Tom looked nervous, I thought.
Well, of course he's nervous. He's, you know, it's the official opposition. They're standing for a really important job, as you say. Yeah. And what I would say is this. I think the mistake you admit, I love James. He's fantastic. He's party chairman, just like me. He's very polished. It was a good performance today, but he stood on that stage, I think, half a dozen times or more and made that speech to conference. He's got muscle memory for it. No wonder he was good. He should have been. I like to think this competition actually isn't about who's going to be good today, but about who's going to be there in 4 years. So, James, maybe the close to the finish article today, but I think both Rob, Kemi and Tom, you know, we won't know what they'll be in 4 years' time. And I just happen to think, out of all of them, and I've made my view clear here on the show before, that he has actually got what it takes. And, you know, giving a good speech is something you can learn, but having the right heart and the right values is something you're born with.
But you've got to get that very fickle electorate of 121 Tory MPs. You've got to be in the last 2. Who's going to be the last 2?
So I'd like to... So I think it just matters who goes out next. So I think if Tom goes out next, I think he makes the last 2, because I think there's a big part of the Conservative Party who will say, we want a real, in terms of the MPs, we want a real choice. We want someone who's more of a centrist and someone who's more right. So that's what I think will happen. If Tom goes out next, then I think James will make the last 2. I think it's Tom or James versus Rob Jenrick.
And Jenrick, you know...
Bobby J, as we have to now call him.
I know. I mean, I have to say, he was trying ever so hard. The arms were whirring around. I mean, is this conversion to reform-style policies, is it real?
Well, I've seen it quite a lot with colleagues. I must say I've been on a bit of a journey myself, as people say, because the more time you spend in government, the more you realise that the only thing you really want to do is tear the whole place down and start again. So I'm sure it is real. I don't think the Conservative Party can out-reform. You are going to outflank us on immigration. You're probably going to outflank us on culture wars. So we've got to be really careful that when we choose the next leader, we don't try and become a reform light or a pressure group on immigration or culture wars, because you don't win elections from that position. You can do remarkably well, and Reform did amazingly at the last general election. But you won 5 MPs. We could have an argument about whether the electoral system's fair. I'm sure it's not.
Not today.
I know it's not.
Not today.
But, you know, we've got to not fall into the trap the Labour Party fell into, which is elect someone who makes you feel good and agrees with lots of your views in Jeremy Corbyn, but then proves to be electorally unpopular.
Which is a very fair point.
We need the whole rounded political person who can win back from the Lib Dems, win back from Reform, and crucially win back from Labour.
See, it's very interesting you say that, because I actually think there's a realignment going on in politics across the Western world, and that people who vote for centre-right parties now tend to have much stronger feelings and opinions than they had before. So I think this idea that you can win back voters from all of those different leakages, I think it's for the birds, Jake.
But of course, I think it's 80 seats in the country where Reform's in second place to the Labour Party. So I'm sure part of Reform's electoral strategy is to try and win votes from the Labour Party.
Oh, it will be.
So you don't necessarily think it's for the birds, because it's actually your strategy.
No. Our strategy is to recognise that the centre-right of politics now in the Western world actually is more working class than middle class. And that's the fundamental change. And people who've gone to Reform or gone to the Lib Dems from your party, very tough to get them both back.
Time will tell.
Well, it is. Lloyd, who's the one that Labour would fear, do you think, of those 4, or none of them?
Well, it's very difficult. I have a feeling that it might be electing the next leader of the opposition, but not necessarily the next Prime Minister. And we saw this, I understand that there was a joke going around a Conservative Party conference where people were asking who were different cabinet members in last time the Conservatives were in opposition, and people couldn't remember who was the Shadow Chancellors, who were because they all disappear into nothingness, really, after a while. And I suspect that might be the case this time. I don't think it's going to be easy for Labour to win the next election either, but I do think that at the moment the odds are not stacked in the Conservatives' favour. I personally think a moderate makes it harder for Labour
So cleverly.
And I think a cleverly or a Tugendhat. And I think a kind of a Brexit Party, Reform Party light person actually does exactly what we've heard. Is it just means that your two parties fight each other but don't really appeal to the electorate. And if the electorate really want the real deal, they'll vote Reform. They're not going to kind of come along and say, oh, the Conservatives are offering half of what Reform is. Oh, yes, I quite wanted half of that. You know, kind of they either want it or they don't want it.
You either want a pint, you never want to drink a half, do you? You want the full pint.
Exactly.
When Cameron offered the referendum back in 2013 under huge pressure from the UKIP surge, people said, well, that's it. The UKIP fox has been shot. And actually, what Cameron did was legitimise a position that UKIP had that was considered beyond the pale. Overnight, what we stood for became respectable. And in a sense, what Jenrick is doing on leaving ECHR is making the position that I've put out there kind of a bit more respectable. This will be, Jake, the 6th leader since 2016.
I'm struggling to keep up. I don't know about you, Nigel.
How many housing ministers there's been?
Yeah, it's almost like the worst days of the UKIP party, isn't it?
Well, yes, but I think by the time that happened, they'd probably...
You were well out.
They'd probably served their purpose. The point I'm making is, it doesn't really matter who the next leader is. It doesn't really matter what the new set of policies are. Isn't the truth of it that for now, and for some years to come, that the Conservative brand is broken? That those people that voted for it in 2019, of the 50% that left, most of them actually feel betrayed by the Conservative Party and loathe it. The brand is now the problem.
Absolutely. At the moment, it's absolutely the problem. 5 years is a long time in politics, and there is the opportunity for whoever the next leader is, and I hope they do, to rebuild that brand. One of the challenges with the leadership election, you've sort of heard it from quite a lot of the candidates, is their message is, well, actually, the problem at the election is we didn't shout loud enough. Well, in fact, the real problem is it didn't matter how loud we shouted, no one was listening because we trashed our own brand. So the first job of any leader is to work out how they rebuild trust. And, you know, the Conservative brand lost its reputation for competence. You'd never buy a car that you know is going to break down, would you? And so you won't vote for a government who you don't think can actually do things.
And trust is not rebuilt overnight.
It's not. It's not. And that's why I think, actually, when the members do think about who's going to be the next leader, the decision isn't, can this person win a general election tomorrow? Clearly, they won't be able to do that. The decision should be, can this person rebuild trust in our brand to put us in a competitive place at the next general election? What I did think was interesting about the Conservative Party conference, there was almost a sort of false dawn. I was walking around and talking to people and said, you know, things are going really well. And I think, God, they're not. They're absolutely bloody terrible. They're absolutely terrible. And the Labour Party doing badly, and it's beyond doubt that they're doing very, very badly, is not the same thing as the Conservative Party
I think that's absolutely right.
But it also doesn't help. I mean, Boris actually did disappear a little bit, able to rebuild his image. It doesn't really help that Liz Truss is still rattling around, making interventions every now and again, because it kind of reminds people about the wrecking of the Conservative brand. And you kind of need her to disappear a bit more than she has, probably, to be able to rebuild.
I don't think just she wrecked the Conservative brand.
No, but I mean, I assume that Rishi will go off to California. We won't see him again. You know, Boris has kept a bit quiet and is rebuilding his brand in a different kind of way. But Liz is kind of hanging around there, and I'm not sure that that's particularly helpful. I do wonder if a Canadian solution might be the only way forward, and we know what the Canadian solution is. The Progressive Conservative Party ruined their brand, were destroyed, and a party called Reform, I think
it's something like that. Do you know, Lloyd, I'm so relieved that you didn't say a Switzerland solution. Though it would have been absolutely terminal.
Well, enough of that. Let's talk about the Labour Party. Let's talk about Keir Starmer's visit to Brussels and the £6,000 that apparently he is repaying some of the donations he took from Lord Ali. All of that after the break.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Princess of Wales has begun planning her annual Christmas Carol concert, marking her return to royal duties after chemotherapy. Princess Catherine held a meeting at Windsor Castle to discuss the events, which will be broadcast this Christmas as she continues to ease back into public engagements. A wonderful story, and I'm joined now by the royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, fantastic stuff. This will be just the kind of royal Christmas message we really, really want, and fantastic news about Catherine's return. Tell us more about this amazing event.
Well, you're absolutely right, because Together Christmas, which is her carol concert, it's been an annual since 2021. It's marvellous news because she's moving back toward royal duties, that's absolutely clear. And the question is, of course, when will we see her next? And, you know, we're all looking forward perhaps to seeing her on Remembrance Day. I'm sure that that is now a definite possibility at the Cenotaph, and subsequently, very definitely, for one of the highlights of the year at Westminster Abbey, which is her concert.
When can we expect any details, for example, of the choice of carols? Because, I mean, that's what people really want to know. What are the details? When are they going to come out?
Well, I don't know when they will be released. Remember, even now, these meetings and these details, they're being very, very carefully managed. What we've got is very, very good news, but there's no doubt, as she made clear in her recent video message, there is still some way to go, and being cancer-free is her priority, obviously. So let's hope, and also let's hope we might see her at the Albert Hall for the Festival of Remembrance. Just a thought.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This Sunday, join me, Camilla Tominey, for an exclusive interview with one of the most controversial, influential and unique political figures of our time. Boris Johnson will be in studio discussing his new memoir, Unleashed, the gripping story of how he dealt with plotting politicians, problematic princes and a pandemic. From Boris bikes to Brexit and everything else in between. This Sunday at 9:30 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, some of your reactions at home to this gripping Conservative leadership contest. Tammy says, who cares? The Conservatives will only stab the winner in the back and then replace them. That's what they do. And that's why they lost the election. They should have kept Boris and they would have won again. No, I don't think they would have done personally. George says, Nigel, I have a hunch that Kemi Badenoch will have the greatest appeal to younger voters. May be true, but what I did think was interesting, looking at the clips of the conference and reports from people that have been there, it does appear that your man's getting the support of the younger people.
Yeah, Tom, he really was in the conference. He was mobbed everywhere.
Quite interesting.
He had an event and everyone couldn't get in, so he had to literally go outside and address them on a soapbox to tell them what he was going to say.
Struck me as being interesting. Final thought from you at home. John says, got to be generic. He's pretty sensible. Surely not cleverly. He's too full of himself. Kemi thinks she's Cleopatra and Tugendhat will say anything to get it. Oh, I love these responses. Now. Keir Starmer goes off to Brussels today to meet the bigwigs, saying he wants to put the Brexit years behind us. What on earth does that mean? Here he was at the press conference afterwards.
Now, of course, there will be issues which are difficult to resolve, and on areas on which we will stand firm. There will be no return to freedom of movement, no return to the customs union, no return to the single market. but we will find constructive ways to work together and deliver for the British people.
So the one real difference that I can see between the last government and this government is on matters of the European Defence Union, where clearly Labour want to be more involved. But what does it all mean, Lloyd? I mean, if we're not going to rejoin any of these things. So how's the relationship going to change?
It is interesting that it was the European defence aspects which were the controversial parts of the Lisbon Treaty and the European Constitution that meant it all fell apart. And it was Britain that was saying we want no European defence coordination. That's what NATO is for. It's very interesting now that it seems to all be forgotten, and suddenly that's the bit that we're happy to go in on.
I haven't forgotten it, I can assure you.
But, you know, that's the narrative. We're happy to go in on that because Ukraine seems to have changed the... Well, is the implication, therefore, that NATO is not working, or that people are worried about what's going to happen in America? That means that they want to create an alternative structure. I'm not sure alternative structures are very good, and particularly an alternative structure that will be controlled by the European Union. We will be a kind of semi-voting member of having a say, but
Very
not a
sensible.
say, either in or out. I mean, you've got to decide. But on freedom of movement stuff, I think that at the moment he's got his rhetoric certainly muddled up with some of the youth mobility programmes, because you can have youth mobility without freedom of movement. We have youth mobility with Australia, we have youth mobility with Japan. The EU has a youth mobility programme with Albania, but still requires visas into the Schengen area. So I think that there will be some programmes like that they will find workarounds, that they say we're going to re-engage in those bits. Youth mobility, to me, is a clear one, because it's the nice bit that people enjoyed. But does
that make it the thin end of the wedge? Does it mean that you do that and then you move on to more and more?
Well, you move on to more and more as long as you're not breaking those three lines. And you can have freedom of movement, so you don't have to have freedom of movement, but you can have some kind of youth mobility visa scheme which allows young people to come, like Australians do, for 2 years, but they have to be out after the 2 years. So you can do things like that that do suddenly put your relationship closer together. But as soon as you start to talk about trade, let's be honest, as soon as you start to talk about trade, you have to make a choice. Do you want to diverge or do you want to converge? And if you're on the converging stream, that is fine, but you are then on the stream of being a rule taker, not a rule maker.
No, I know. And actually, one of my biggest criticisms of the Conservatives since Brexit was finally delivered, is we haven't really diverged at all, have we?
No, we haven't, but we have got the ability to do it. Now, let's look at what Keir Starmer actually said himself in his manifesto about what should happen with the European Union. He said every single part of the Brexit deal needs renegotiation, whether that's free movement, whether that's joining the European army, whatever it is. His own manifesto says he is going to renegotiate every single part of the Brexit deal. And do not forget that deal, conveniently enough for him, comes up for review in 2026. And what this is, I'm sorry, Russell, but, you know, what this is softening the British public up with nice things. Of course, all we'll want our kids to be able to go and study in Spain and Portugal and wherever else it may be. In Germany. It is softening the British public up. He and his civil service chums, now they've got a year to work on us for, ultimately, in my view, a Brexit betrayal in 2026. That's what they said they wanted to do in their manifesto, is change every part of the Brexit deal.
Let's assume that Jake's right. But that would give him a huge problem with those 4 million Labour voters that are quite strong Brexiteers.
Yes, it would give a problem unless you can show that you are cashing in some of the Brexit dividend. So, for example, you could change some of the finance regulations in the city. The EU regulations have stopped the ability for research to be bundled together with investment, which is a complete nightmare for investment, because it means you've got to separately decide to pay for the research to know what bit of the investment you want to invest in and where the trends are, and it means you're getting worse kinds of investments. It would give Britain a competitive advantage if you were to allow rebundling of that. It would go against the EU rules, but you could quite easily make a case that on goods and services we want some conversion, but we're going to get the diversion.
Do you think he'd do that?
On some of those other things.
Do you really think he'd do that?
I think he could legitimately say, actually, I haven't cashed in on the bits that we needed to cash in on, but the bits that we didn't really need, because we all want our electronic goods to be of a safety standard, I'm happy to partake.
Lloyd,
if he does it, that would be the strategy.
If he was to do that, politically that would be very, very clever, and you might buy off. But I mean, obviously, you know, he's the man that wanted a second referendum. He didn't respect the result of the first one. The instincts of those at the top of the Labour Party are Remainer straight rejoiner. So I'm going to watch it very, very carefully.
It's the instincts of people at the top of government.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, there's one party that really won the last general election. It wins every single time. It's called the civil service. And until you actually change that, you will have this Remain establishment who have never forgiven the British people for voting for Brexit.
Sticking with Starmer, he's today. So Lord Ali, we hear, is now going to be investigated by the Standards Board of the House of Lords for not making proper declarations. And the Prime Minister has agreed to repay £6,000 worth of gifts that he's received since he was Prime Minister. He's in a bit of trouble over this, isn't he? Because, you know, he's really been giving us for the last couple of years the art holier than thou, I'm different, I'm going to change politics. It's not a good look, is it?
Well, I think it is not a good look if you dig your heels in. And what we saw with the last government, if you remember when they were trying to then change the rules last minute when commissions were saying that their MPs had lobbied, etc., was that it looked like people were trying to cover it up after the effect. I think if he repays it, draws a line under it, the country will probably quickly forget. The worst thing is to allow it to rumble on. So that's why he's decided to pay the money back and to make sure the rules are changed so there's greater transparency going forward. Now, as I've said on this programme before, I actually think some of it is slightly rated. The reason we have this declaration system is to try and stop people buying influence. I'm not sure Lord Ali, who's a Labour peer already at the centre of the project, already in the inner circle, was buying influence by it. I think that he was just helping his friends out. The problem is that it is impossible to draw a line between someone who's buying influence and helping your friends.
He's got an awful lot of friends, hasn't he?
He has. I mean, he's paid far more, bigger amounts of money to other people. I mean, in the millions to some other people. I think that as long as there is a clear trail, I don't think there is a problem necessarily with these things. And we've seen that.
I don't begrudge Keir Starmer getting a box at Arsenal. Because for him to sit in the stands would be absolutely ridiculous. But all this stuff did the Tory party huge damage over the years. This has hurt Starmer, hasn't it?
I think it has. And the thing is that I saw Pat McFadden was out this weekend saying these were political donations. They absolutely were not. A political donation is made to a political party, and once the political party receives it, they can pretty much spend it on whatever they want, and it isn't declarable. Lord Ali, for whatever reason, decided to make these donations directly to these individuals, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Deputy Prime Minister. Now, I wouldn't like to get into speculating as to why he would prefer to have a direct relationship, giving money to people rather than to a political party, and access to number 10.
Access to number 10 is a very, very different thing.
And why this is so bad...
Some of these donations were, I have a flat that's sitting empty, come and use it. We all have had friends.
I get that.
We all have had friends.
I don't have any friends who have an £18 million flat.
Not an £18 million flat.
If you're watching...
I've got friends who have got a spare bedroom. You know, when I got rid of, you know, kind of, I had friends, you know, a friend in Sheffield who has a small little flat said, if you need to get away from it all because it's all a bit stressful, Lloyd, come up to Sheffield and you can crash on my spare room. I didn't take her up on that, but I think
you didn't do Zoom calls from it, sort of letting people believe it was actually your house.
So I think that, again, we need to cut some of this.
The fact that he's got unlimited access to number 10 is most unusual.
Well, had.
Well, he briefly had a pass to number 10.
Until it was exposed.
Didn't have one at the moment.
It's not a good look.
Look, if he's a member of the party already, I think the donations of things like glasses and clothes and tickets to Taylor Swift, which are not from Lord Ali, I understand, these are from other people, that, I think, is not the good look. I mean, Keir's glasses look identical, in my eyes, to my glasses, and I got mine from Specsavers.
There you are.
So I do wonder...
On that advertisement, which we're not supposed to do on this show, but never mind. In a moment, we will discuss a 17-year, can you believe it, backlog in some asylum cases and a surge in HIV cases in this country of people born overseas. Why? How? And is that what the NHS is really for?
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office.
Well, it's going to be a cold night ahead with some frost and fog in places, but generally high pressure is building, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather to come. Still low pressure dominating across the south, so cloudier here with some showers, but high pressure in the north is building across the country, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather. Now, as we head into this evening, still some cloud across the south, but it is generally breaking up as we head into the overnight period, so leaving plenty of clear spells. Largely dry, though, still the chance of a few showers just poking into the southeastern coasts. But otherwise, a dry night for many, plenty of clear spells, so it will be feeling cold with some fog in places too, particularly in northern areas. Might just be a little bit slow to clear by the time we reach tomorrow morning as well. So as I say, particularly across Scotland, it will be feeling cold, likely to see some grass frost, may even see a little bit of frost on your cars during the early hours of the morning, and there will be fog in places too, so do take care when travelling. This generally lifting and breaking through the course of the morning, but as I say, there may be some stubborn fog, which is slow to clear. Largely dry across the south, still those showers just feeding into the southeast coast. But as I say, high pressure building, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather across the country. There is still the chance of the odd shower across the southeast, but you'll probably be unlucky if you do catch any. Largely dry, plenty of sunny spells and some lighter winds as well. So even though temperatures are generally round about average with highs of around 16, 17 in the southeast, it'll probably feel more pleasant in those lighter winds. As we head into Friday, still plenty of fine and settled weather around, but low pressure is trying to edge its way into the west. So cloudier here with some outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland. And there will still be plenty of fine, dry weather across the country as we head into the weekend, but we are expecting some more unsettled spells as well. So as always, stay tuned for all the details. Bye for now.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, this is a subject that got me into terrible trouble in the 2015 general election during the leaders' debate with Ed Miliband and David Cameron. This is what I said. I mentioned health tourism. OK, here's a fact, and I'm sure the other people will be mortified that I dare to talk about it. There are 7,000 diagnoses in this country every year for people who are HIV positive, which is not a good place for any of them to be, I know. But 60% of them are not British nationals. You can come into Britain from anywhere in the world and get diagnosed with HIV and get the retroviral drugs that cost up to £25,000 per year per patient. Well, of course, the howls of condemnation that came down upon me have made it very difficult to talk about this subject. But once again, this subject is back as migrants fuel a surge in HIV cases to a 15-year high. Now, when we say migrants, these are people that were born overseas. And I just asked the simple question, as I did then, is this what the National Health Service is actually for? Lloyd Russell-Moyle, you've studied this, you've looked at this. What does it mean, this surge in numbers again?
Well, there's two elements of... the overall numbers of people being diagnosed have increased. And out of that increase, it comes from two areas. One are people who are born outside of Britain but are now in Britain. And another way of cutting the pie to look at the surge of increase is people who contracted HIV outside of Britain. Now, we don't know. These people could be British citizens. They could have been people who have been here a long time. But the increase is interesting, isn't it? And the increase is from that group of people. Now, what we have to do with when you see any increase is you have to look to see where testing or the data source has changed. And what we changed last year is doing routine testing of everyone that goes into A&E in our cities and big towns now is automatically diagnosed with HIV, whereas before you would have to have gone to a sexual health clinic or effectively a pregnant woman.
So we're discovering more cases.
So we are discovering more cases, and it's unsurprising that those cases are people that in the past weren't comfortable with going to sexual health clinics, and they tend to be black and ethnic minority people who are heterosexual, because they assume I don't need to go and get a test in the same way that gay, bisexual men do, or people who are sexually active and who have gone through the education system in the UK who might understand that you go to a sexual health clinic before you need to. So out of that number, it might not be the migrants who are arriving as we speak, and it might well be actually a very positive thing that we are catching those people, and it stops, of course, them transmitting it, because as soon as you are on treatment, you can't pass it on anymore, and you stop the transmission. And our aim in the UK is to treat everyone, and so that by 2030 we have no homegrown passing HIV on.
Is it the job, Jake, of the National Health Service to provide care for people like this?
Well, absolutely it is. If they're in the United Kingdom and they're British citizens.
If they're here, what if they're here illegally?
Well, look, I mean, that is a much, much bigger debate. I think one of the positive things about this is that sick people are getting treated. I think that's what the NHS is there to do. There's a much wider debate about immigration and should the NHS, the minute you arrive in this country, you immediately be entitled to free healthcare. That is the law as it is. People have their own view about that. My view is actually there's probably no way you can ration it. So what we've actually got to do is defend our borders, stop people to come into this country illegally and prevent it that way, and give the government to step up and make that happen. What I think is really interesting about this is it's so stark, isn't it? It's the 53% increase in diagnosis in a year, which may well be this change of the law, which the government did, but
why
it's
that
so
is.
stark. And I was very concerned to see that ambition, which we all share, to have zero transmission by 2030, the experts say is being put at risk after this big spike.
Well, we also need more data. We need more data. We need to find out. And by the way, getting any data out of this government is difficult, but we do need more data.
I think there is a question also about how most countries deal with infectious diseases. So there's a difference between should people have access to everything on the NHS, and with certain infectious diseases that it's a public health issue to try and make sure TB, HIV, other diseases. My view is, and even in the US, these are diseases that are treated freely by the public health system of the US, and most people think that the US is a pay-for system because they understand that it is a public health issue.
There'll be many people watching this now and listening to this now saying, I've paid my taxes for years and I can't even see a GP. But let's move on to another subject. OK, 447 inmates were released from Scottish prisons in 4 tranches over the course of this summer. And guess what? 57 have reoffended, been reconvicted and are back behind bars. This is, and all of this, Lloyd, for chucking people in prisons who say nasty things on Facebook. This is terrible.
Well, that reoffending rate, over 10%, is terrible, and it surprises me the categories of people that they have released. Look, if someone has committed some minor order offences, OK, early release programmes seem to be understandable, but some of that list were kind of violent offences or sexual offences. And my view is that those offences, I am shocked that they are being released. Now, clearly we should have built prisons, but we have discussed on this programme again before, there needs to be a reconsideration of what kind of offences have certain kinds of prison sentences at the moment, because I think we have got ourselves in a muddle where the wrong kind of offences that the public no longer see as really important offences versus offences that people do see as really important
I tell you what,
are not getting jail time.
One thing I will praise this government for is saying they're going to decriminalise those that don't pay the BBC licence fee, because many women have gone to prison over the last couple of decades for non-payment of the BBC licence fee. Jake, this is all your fault. You left it in a terrible mess.
Well, we did actually build, I think it was 2, if not 3 new prisons during the last government. So we are building more prisons, and we did build more prisons. But the truth is that, you know, the wrong categories of prisoners have been let out. If you let out violent offenders, then they will probably continue being violent offenders. I'm actually quite surprised it's so low. I'm quite surprised it's 10%. If you look at some of the people who've been let out...
They've only had a couple of months.
Well, I know, but I'm still quite surprised. I thought it would be higher. Now,
It's the people we know who have been caught.
Well, they're the ones who've been caught. The wrong people have been let out. And we've got to have a debate about what prison is for. I actually take the view, like Michael Howard did, prison works, and there is a big part of prison that is just removing dangerous and nasty people from society, keeping them away from you and allowing decent law-abiding people to get on with their lives without fear. And that is what we've lost by this early release.
Since the 1980s, we have lost 100,000 places in secure mental health hospitals, and we have, I'm afraid, not increased prison places. And there is a correlation between people who needed not necessarily prison, but they did need secure mental health. And I'm not saying all people with mental health problems, of course, are criminals.
But this is the whole care in the community debate, Lloyd, isn't it?
But we do know that there is a good proportion of people who are in prisons at the moment who actually need permanent, secure arrangements, which even when they are released, they will need permanent, secure arrangements.
Do you think care in the community is failing?
I think care in the community with austerity has failed, and I think that there is some elements of care in the community that was nice and woolly kind of thinking, but actually it doesn't always work, and there will be some people, I'm afraid, and we just need to be accepting of this, that will need secure accommodation.
Final thought on this to Jake Berry. The alternative to care in the community, and yes, there are compromises to be found, is putting people in institutions the rest of their life.
So I don't think
it's difficult, isn't it?
I don't think anyone wants to go back to the old asylum, as they were once known. But I think we have to accept that something is going very badly wrong with mental health in this country. And I hope what their government will do is look at other countries around the world which have a more nuanced approach, as we've tried to set out on the show this evening. And actually, that is better for those individuals, and it's better for society because it helps keep us safe.
I'm going to draw stumps and say thank you to Jake and Lloyd for joining me this evening. In a moment, we've debated it before, it's the trophy hunting ban. It's coming back to Parliament. But actually, is it going to benefit animals and communities in Africa, or could it actually do them harm?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
My kingdom for a voice. Scientists have, I can't believe this story, scientists have incredibly recreated the voice of Richard III using both his skull shape and a knowledge of medieval speech patterns. Me neither. The result is that the king, who was famously killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, would have spoken in English close to that of a man from modern-day Yorkshire or Somerset. Let's take a listen.
The sun shines with no less light and splendour, nor does it suffer any diminution of its strength.
Let's discuss this further with Yvonne Morley-Chisholm, the voice coach behind the project, who spent 10 years researching how the monarch would have sounded. Yvonne, you can probably see from my face, I have no idea how this works. Can you enlighten me as to what all this is about?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Dawn. So, yes, I had a mad idea 10 years ago. I normally work with actors where we have a recording of a historical person, and we do something called vocal profiling to train the actor who's going to be performing on stage or screen to move their tongue tip, their jaw, their lips, everything, and get behind the personality of who they're playing. We obviously have quite a lot of that missing from Richard. We don't have a recording of him, but I wondered how far we could go. And a key player in this has been and is Professor Caroline Wilkinson, who over a decade ago created his face, first of all, from his skull. Now, on the day we, as Shakespeare would say, shuffle off our mortal coil, every little dent and dimple in the bones says how fit and strong the muscles were. So I thought, OK, we know what his face could do.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday, we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the last Parliament, a private member's bill was brought in by Henry Smith, then the Conservative Member of Parliament for Crawley. It was the Hunting Trophies Import Prohibition Bill, but it ran out of time. It didn't happen, but it was brought back by Labour MP John Speller. Now, normally at the end of a Parliament, anything like this that hasn't gone through just dies. It's run out of time. But John Speller's now in the Lords. He's brought it back. So this is going to come back for a vote next week. And it would mean that people going to Africa or other parts of the world who were shooting animals and wanted their heads put on a trophy and brought back to Britain would not be allowed to do so. But I wonder, and I've always wondered, will this really be a benefit to those communities, particularly in Africa? Well, one person who thinks it may not be is Professor Amy Dickman, co-author of the study that came from Oxford and Professor of Wildlife Conservation at the Oxford University. And contrary to what many say, Amy, you think that the trophy hunting ban would have a bad effect on African wildlife and African communities.
Yes, and it's important to note that this isn't just an African issue. Trophy hunting occurs all the way around the globe, but it tends to be focused on Africa, I think, because we have this very Disney-fied image of Africa. And as you say, the analysis that shows about this was framed very much as a conservation issue. And I think it's true that most people would support a trophy hunting ban if they think it would actually help conservation, which is the line they've been told by lobby groups, etc. We thought it was very important on these contentious issues to actually look at the evidence that underpins this. And so we looked at the data. We found that actually, of all the species that were imported to the UK since 2000, trophy hunting was not a key threat to a single one of them. And actually, it had benefits to around 20 species that were imported. So and it has far wider benefits because trophy hunting brings in important revenue to these countries. As you say, it has important benefits then for local communities through jobs, revenue, meat, etc. And also, critically, for that wildlife, it helps incentivise the maintenance of huge areas of wildland and to fund anti-poaching. And the key threats to species are habitat loss and poaching, not trophy hunting. And we are very worried that this kind of bill could do far more harm than good. And that's not what it's been sold at by the previous government or this one.
Amy, thank you for making the case. Joining me is Henry Smith, the original promoter of this legislation. Is your objection to trophy hunting a sort of a moral objection? Is it people shouldn't be allowed to behave like this?
This is about stopping endangered species being killed and their body parts being imported into this country. So it's both about conservation of those species that are endangered, that may well go extinct within a generation or two, but also it's about what we choose to import into this country, just as we banned live animal exports for slaughter at the end of the last Parliament. So this would be proposing to end the importation of endangered species body parts into this country. So it is both about what we choose to import here. It's not telling other countries what to do. And it's also about seeking to make sure that those endangered species, majestic animals like elephants and lions, are there to be seen for future generations.
But Amy argues, and it's a pretty comprehensive study, Amy argues that actually the money that comes into the local communities in Africa or wherever else it may be actually overall help the conservation of those species.
Well, there are many different academic opinions on trophy hunting and the impact that it has on those endangered species. I think it's important to follow the money, and there is big money in this. Very little of that money actually goes to local African communities. I would argue that photo safaris, for example, which is carried out in Kenya, is something where they don't have trophy hunting, where that hasn't been allowed since the 1970s, is far more lucrative to those local African economies than shooting an endangered species. If you shoot a 50-year-old tusker elephant, that's one and done. That animal is then dead. Often they die very slowly. But if you have photo safaris, then that economy can benefit many times from people visiting to see those majestic animals.
I don't think that animals shot by high-velocity rifles die slowly. I think it happens pretty quickly, but that's perhaps a slightly separate debate. Isn't the truth of it, Henry Smith, that what you want to do, and John Speller from Labour, you basically take a moral position to say you, a British citizen, should not be allowed to do this?
Well, it's what we choose to import and export. It's a Brexit freedom that we have.
We've banned fox hunting in this country.
Well, and this isn't about fox hunting.
Well, it's very similar, isn't it?
Well, foxes aren't an endangered species. What we are talking about
Do you support the hunting ban?
I don't see any need to change the legislation as we have in this country at the moment where it comes to that. But we are talking about endangered species here and whether they will survive into the future. And it's not just African countries. This is about polar bears in Canada and other species around the world as well.
Whose numbers have exploded over the last few years, polar bears?
Well, this would cover species under CITES, the international agreement on trade of endangered species. If an animal is listed as endangered, then it would be covered by this legislation to ban the importation of those body parts of those species into this country.
You're going to win this, aren't you?
I'm no longer in Parliament. I chose not to seek re-election.
But you set this off.
I introduced this legislation, as you said in your introduction. We ran out of time.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a piece of legislation I promoted. I hope it does become law. Parliament is a funny place, and I'm never complacent about what I would like to see making it onto the statute book. There have been successes and failures in my political lifetime in that respect, and never say never.
For good or bad, it will be your legacy. Henry, thank you once again for coming on the programme. Now, Jacob, were you there at the beauty parade earlier on today?
I wasn't. I actually listened to it on the car driving back on GBNews radio.
Very good.
Which was a very good way of listening to it, yes.
Who was the winner?
I thought Kemi's performance was the strongest. The strongest oratorical performance, the most charismatic, with Robert Jenrick being a close second.
Good Lord.
I thought Tom did much better than people have been saying. People have been very critical of his speech, but I thought it was actually pretty good. And James Cleverly was James Cleverly. I mean, he is popular, but I thought it was. I didn't like him being rude about you. Actually, that was the bit that annoyed me.
I can put up with that.
Yeah, no. But it's not that you can't put up with it. It's that we need to work with people who've aided reform, and we need to say, look, you're our friends, and we may be in different parties, but you are not Keir Starmer. You're not the opposite side of the coin from Keir Starmer. You're really not.
Jacob, what's your main subject tonight?
The main subject is what's going on between Israel and Iran, how fundamentally important that is, and trying to get some more understanding of what's going on and what the risks are.
Good. Well, State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg in a few moments. But first, let's have a look at the all-important weather with Honor Criswick.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, it's going to be a cold night ahead with some frost and fog in places, but generally high pressure is building, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather to come. Still low pressure dominating across the south, so cloudier here with some showers, but high pressure in the north is building across the country, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather. Now, as we head into this evening, still some cloud across the south, but it is generally breaking up as we head into the overnight period, so leaving plenty of clear spells. Largely dry, though, still the chance of a few showers just poking into the southeastern coasts. But otherwise, a dry night for many, plenty of clear spells, so it will be feeling cold with some fog in places too, particularly in northern areas. Might just be a little bit slow to clear by the time we reach tomorrow morning as well. So as I say, particularly across Scotland, it will be feeling cold, likely to see some grass frost, may even see a little bit of frost on your cars during the early hours of the morning, and there will be fog in places too, so do take care when travelling. This generally lifting and breaking through the course of the morning, but as I say, there may be some stubborn fog, which is slow to clear. Largely dry across the south, still those showers just feeding in to the southeast coast. But as I say, high pressure building, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather across the country. There is still the chance of the odd shower across the southeast, but you'll probably be unlucky if you do catch any. Largely dry, plenty of sunny spells and some lighter winds as well. So even though temperatures are generally round about average with highs of around 16, 17 in the southeast, it'll probably feel more pleasant in those lighter winds. As we head into Friday, still plenty of fine and settled weather around, but low pressure is trying to edge its way into the west. So cloudier here with some outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland. And there will still be plenty of fine, dry weather across the country as we head into the weekend, but we are expecting some more unsettled spells as well. So as always, stay tuned for all the details. Bye for now.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient.